All right. Hello. Welcome to the Middle East Forum's webinar and podcast series, Israel Insider, this week with Alex Selsky. I'm Stacey Roman, and I will be moderating this discussion today. We are pleased to have Alex Selsky, a senior advisor to the Middle East Forum's Israel Victory Project, join us this week to update us on all the events going on in Israel. Mr. Selsky will be giving us a briefing on current Israeli affairs for 15 minutes, then open it up for questions. Should you wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. And with that, I'll turn the discussion over to Mr. Alex Selsky. No, sorry, Alex, you're muted.
Yes, sorry. Okay, Stacey, thank you very much, and a good evening from Jerusalem to all our viewers and listeners, and happy Independence Day of the State of Israel. 75 years, we're very, very young. My father is 70, and I told him today that look at the country, looked so good. So you are very, very young. So as you definitely know, Independence Day is a very, very happy day, days of happenings and days of, having barbecues. So we're all just back from barbecue on a beach of Herzliya, my family. So our topic today is actually the current situation in Israel, and Israel continues to be politically divided. And we will speak about that, and then about the fact that this is a domestic issue, not a policy international issue. And we'll try to answer the question, what's next? What's next, as on Monday, the Knesset is coming back for summer session, and the biggest question what's next with the judicial reform, and the split, and the argument, and the negotiations, and judicial reform, and the negotiations, and what will be the next few months. Will we have a compromise? Will we stay with a stable government, etc.? So first of all, I would like to say that we did have an Israel Insider webinar for 2 weeks, not for a week. And these 2 weeks were actually the most, touching and most sensitive in our national identity, because last week we had the Holocaust Remembrance Day. Yesterday we had Remembrance Day, at which we remember our soldiers who fell in the wars of Israel, and the victims of terror, including the civil victims. And as you definitely know, immediately after the Remembrance Day, we have the Independence Day. So the political, division, and this political tension within the society was very much felt the last week before the Remembrance Day, because many families of terror victims asked the politicians not to arrive to the cemeteries, to the military cemeteries at the Remembrance Day. Now, that was a very outstanding, symbol of all the tension that we have, because this is so unusual. The Remembrance Day always is the day of unity, and the days when we don't have political splits and we don't have political arguments. It's always, the Holocaust Remembrance Day and the Remembrance Day, it's always out of politics. And for the first time, I think I remember, we had, families saying, we don't want to see politicians. Now, I think it was not about, against any politician. Definitely, I think it was toward the coalition. and every side tried to take advantage of this tension. One side said that how shame that these are the coalitional leaders that the public doesn't want to see at the cemeteries, and the oppositely, the coalition leaders said that how shame that the opposition is taking advantage. But couple of days before the day of remembrance, it was a common call, united call by the Prime Minister Netanyahu, head of opposition Lapid, head of המחנה הממלכתי Party, Benny Gantz, and by the president, a united call to keep the politics outside the cemeteries, and a call to have a united Remembrance Day and Day of Independence. And I think it definitely worked, because after all, we didn't see really much incidents during the Remembrance Day. Couple of, I think relatively small incidents. One of them, and maybe the biggest, which made noise very unexpected way, it was the visit of Minister Ben Gvir, in the cemetery in Beersheba, where he went, and during his speech, he was cursed, and some of the families of the victims of the soldiers, cursed him and shouted on him, and he said, let them shout, they definitely have the right. But overall, it was not something, outstandingly loud or violent. We didn't see any violence. So generally speaking, it was much more united than we could expect. So I think that we passed it in a very good way. And overall, I think, not only I think that much of this tension and much of the expectation for this tension was exaggerated and exaggerated, inflated by both sides, and definitely by the media. After all, I think, and I hope, to think also, and I hope to convince everybody and myself as well, that this tension is much more seen in the media and in the political, arena, but within the society, these splits and these tensions are much less felt and much less seen. And I think that, if you, in the times of COVID, we had a joke that if you don't want to have, if you don't want to know about COVID, or if you don't want to see COVID, just throw your TV out. So I think that much of it we can say about the the political tension. I think that it's within the society, we still are very, very united, and I think we felt that now during the days, these sacred days for us, the Remembrance Day and the Independence Day. And also, we didn't see some outstanding incidents in the ceremonies, in the official ceremonies. Everything went well. Everybody spoke about it. Everything spoke about the need of unity. The president and the prime minister and all the leaders of the political system and the parties. I also think that for large extent, I think that many of the leadership understood how big can be the damage of this split and the tension. Definitely, when everybody spoke about the damage in the security, as our enemies, look at us and they think that we are weak and that they can hurt us and they can take the opportunity of these tensions. But as Naftali Bennett said that very, very correct in one of his interviews in the United States. He went to give a few interviews, and he said, we're a Jewish state. Jews are people of debate. We definitely are people of debate. We have so many jokes about it, as for example, in a village with two Jews, you have to have, three synagogues, because one synagogue that the second doesn't go to, the second synagogue where the first doesn't go to, the first synagogue where the second doesn't go to, and the third synagogue that both don't go to. Okay, so yes, we're Jews, and we debate and we argue. It doesn't mean that we're not united. Jews were always debating, and political tensions were, in 60s before the 6 Days War, and definitely in 30s, and for all the histories. So I definitely think that is the situation. However, definitely we can say that these, calm down is because the negotiations on the reform and the promotion of the reform is at the moment on hold. So maybe everybody is just, waiting to see what's going to happen. We saw, by the way, during these days, all the time, we saw the protests, and we saw, protests in front of, next to, all the formal ceremonies, but it wasn't something outstanding. But again, definitely maybe everybody is, waiting on low start to see what's going to happen in May, because on Monday, the upcoming Monday, the Knesset is coming back for the summer session, meaning that the legislation can be started and can be progressed again. But I don't think, continuing to the question, what's next? I don't think that in May we will see much of a progress, because the government and the coalition have to pass the budget. The government already approved the budget, and now the Knesset must approve the budget, and they voted for the budget in first reading. I remind you that in Israeli legislation process, you need 3 readings, 3 votings of the Knesset to complete the procedure of legislation. It still means that much of the legislation progress is ahead of us. And I also want to remind you that a major argument is within the negotiations on the budget, as the ultra-Orthodox parties negotiate and demand to have the correction of the law concerning their army service to be part of the budget that has to be passed now within May. And there is still a very big argument on that, as they want to lower the age of exemption from the military service from 26 to either 23 or 21 even. And this is still in negotiations. So this can be a very big issue. And if the budget doesn't pass until the end of May, the government by law is, we go to next elections. So they have to, if they want to survive and they want to have a stable government, they must put aside the reform in order to pass the budget within May. And I expect that that's what they will do. So we apparently we'll be back to the fight over the reform in June, July. Until then, let's see how the argument on the budget and the argument on the military service, military reform of of the ultra-Orthodox Jews, ultra-Orthodox parties will pass and how it will end, and it will definitely have implications on the reform. And also, let's see, if the security crisis not over, as many speak about a possible operation and maybe even kind of a war, because our enemies might definitely try to take advantage of as they think that our arguments and debate, as I said before, is kind of a weakness. And we also see that many of our rivals and our enemies get backing from China, backing from Iran. You definitely know that Syria gets into normalization slowly, but definitely gets progress in their relations with United Arab Emirates and even Saudi Arabia, and Hamas delegation visited Saudi Arabia. All that definitely can have implications. So that's what may can bring us. So this is what's next. And I understand that I cannot go too much into details, as we already finished the first part. So now let's try to to get into details during the questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So the first question is from David Levine. Asking, he has two questions. First one is, might the current unrest finally lead to a long overdue constitutional convention so that Israel may join other Western democracies by having such a document?
Very good question, and very wishful thinking, which I think everybody who wants a stability for the state and for the political system definitely prays for. But nothing is new under the sun, and the Israeli democratic system is always, consists of parties that think about their narrow interest. So I don't see that this coalition is different from many previous ones, and that it will want to risk their ability to maneuver and pass laws as they want. And the proof of it is that they wanted to to have legislation that can overcome the Supreme Court in a majority of 61, which is the minimal majority, which tells us that they don't want stability, they want control of themselves. So dear David, thank you for your wishful thinking. I don't see, unfortunately, that this government will want it. Now, if it will not be forced, I don't think we're there. I don't know what must happen to force the coalition to do so. I'm more pessimistic about that than optimistic.
Thank you. His second question is, might the current crisis finally lead to a requirement that all Israelis, including religious Torah scholars, be required to do some kind of national service to heal the rift between the religious and secular?
Interestingly, many think that the fact that ultra-Orthodox parties are so strong in this coalition that they will force the coalition to give maximum exempt. But interestingly, look what's happening. This is my view, and I read it already in some analysis, that actually, if really the law that will pass now will lower the exemption from the service to 21 from 26, what will happen is that more and more young ultra-Orthodox will integrate into the labor market. And actually that will, I think, will cause faster integration within the labor force and within the society. And even if now in this reform, they will not demand, or they will not pass, or they will not agree upon an alternative service, because they will not agree on a full military service for ultra-Orthodox, by the very simple reason that the army doesn't need them all. It's not that we all want, the army says we don't need them all, but we do need them, and we do want and must have them within the, you know, governmental alternative service. By the way, I must tell you that ultra-Orthodox generally are very, very involved, usually more than any other else, in social welfare organization that helps, that help to needy, help to um, ill children, and etc., etc. And the biggest, non-governmental organization in Israel is Ezer Mitzion, that helps to the children that are have cancer, is managed and budgeted by ultra-Orthodox. So they definitely, and many of services, again, non-governmental services toward, in a field of welfare and healthcare, like Yad Sarah, Ichud Hatzalah, are ultra-Orthodox. So they do a lot, but they do that without government regulation. I think that even if they now will not have this regulation and service, the very fact that more and more ultra-Orthodox will go and integrate into the market, the labor market, will lead very soon to the fact that they will just integrate into the society. So it will happen. It will finally happen. I don't see that it cannot happen, because after all, we know, I teach for 10 years in Hadassah Academic College in Jerusalem, and for 2 years I was teaching ultra-Orthodox class. And after 2 years, we didn't have more students because their rabbis didn't let them. Now, we had many, many researches and many lectures about what's happening with the academic studies within the ultra-Orthodox society. And we understood that 80%, 85% are willing to learn, to work, to make a living, and the majority and the minority is stopping them. So slowly but surely, this will happen. They will integrate, keeping their way of life, but integrating into the workforce and into the alternative service in more and more army as well, I'm sure.
Thank you. Eric asked, how unique is it that some of the ministers in Netanyahu's government have not served in the military?
I'm not sorry, I didn't hear you.
How unique is it that some of the ministers in Netanyahu's government have not served in the military?
How unique? Well, ultra-Orthodox, as you know, who are the major partners of Netanyahu in his all his coalitions, actually. Historically, for last few decades, they as I just spoke about it before, they didn't serve and prevented their public from serving in the Israeli army. So many of them, like their leader, yes, Yitzhak, forgot his name, the minister of housing, he didn't serve. So, by the way, that was part of the critics during the Remembrance Day, that people said, don't send us the ministers that didn't serve. And the other minister who made, the biggest noise about not serving is Ben-Gvir, who, by the way, sued someone who claimed that he didn't serve because he, I don't know exactly how you say English, but he ran out of service. Okay, and he sued him because he said that he wanted to serve, but the army didn't take him. But still he didn't. Okay, how unique that is? Well, for ultra-Orthodox, it's not unique. For those in the Zionist religious camp, this is kind of unique, actually. And Ben-Gvir is a unique politician, I think, in in many manners. So yes, and that's big criticism from the opposition, and also within, I think, within the the right wing camp, about the fact that many of the leaders in such a sensitive, in terms of security, at times didn't serve. But again, I need to tell you here that we already saw the generals are not the best defense ministers and are not the best strategists in terms of security, because I always say, and I'm doing reserve service, and I'm an officer, and I'm proud of IDF, but knowing how to use force. An army is an organization that uses force, but knowing how to use force is not the only thing you must know to provide security. Security is much more than that. Security is about understanding policy and politics and economy and spirit. And not every, sometimes we saw already that people who didn't come from from being generals were not bad ministers of security at all, like Victor Lieberman, Moshe Arens, Peretz, okay, and many other. By the way, Shamir, well, he was in in Etzel and then in Mossad, but he didn't come from an army, and from the army, and he wasn't a general. So it's not necessarily that you have to be in the army to know how to deal with security. And some people say, by the way, it's one of the most effective ministers within the cabinet is Deri. Okay, I don't know, some say.
All right, well, thank you. JL asks, was the decision by Netanyahu not to speak at the conference of major Jewish organizations seen as a caving in the anti-reform radicals? Two.
What much was discussed, why Netanyahu didn't come. I don't know. We don't know. He definitely didn't say, didn't tell us that, the true reason. I definitely think that it might be that he knew that it's gonna be a very big criticism on his policy, and he wouldn't feel at home as he usually did feel. And Netanyahu was always a superstar among American Jewry, by the way, Orthodox and Reform, and both sides. And today it's not the same. Today I think that all the liberal Jews in the United States are very much against the government, and they express that freely. And many of them speak about using American politics and their ability to to demand pressure on Israel within American politics. And I think that Israeli leadership, not only, by the way, in coalition, but also in opposition of them, don't like it. I think we have a very, very, I think, historical split, and very, very unfortunately, a crisis in our relationship with the liberal Jewish communities in the United States. But I do agree that we don't. We have to. We have to solve. We Jews and we Israelis, we have to solve our problems within us, among us, and we don't need to ask others to press on us or on some sides of us, to solve these problems.
Absolutely. And thank you so much. That brings us to the close of our webinar and podcast. Ashley, thank you for taking time to update us this week. Or Alex, sorry. I'm so used to that. All right. For our viewers and listeners, please join us Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern for a webinar with Sam Westrop discussing Americans versus Europeans. Guess who deals better with Islamism? Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.
Thank you.